Hello, everybody, and welcome again. Today we are here with Aoife. Aoife, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Excellent. I'm excited about today's topic. This is our third or fourth session, isn't it?
Oh, I'm losing track actually, but I'm enjoying every single one of them. So I
Le-
I could I could keep doing this for the rest of the year.
Oh my
Give me
God,
the opportunity.
this is so awesome. Because as I always say, the life around the horse, it's so nice and so great, and it has so many challenges too. And what I refer often to the circle of influence.
Yep.
And I'm envision this wagon wheel, and the wagon wheel has spokes, and each spoke is important. And while I, as a saddle manufacturer and saddle fitter, look a lot to body workers for horse and rider, and you are so instrumental when it comes to body awareness from the rider's point of view.
Right.
So, as usual, I like to start off with going in a little bit today. Like in our session, we talked about the 14 reflex points what create negative reaction to the horse. Today, we're going to focus on the spot here. This one here is called the bucking reflex points. As a matter of fact, the reason why we call it that way is because when we put riders on that spot, the horse will react, and 90% it's bucking. Sometimes in the Western world, we put a flank strap, put a strap right here, and we put a lot of pressure here, and the horse goes nuts, the bucking strap. Or when we look in Kentucky, where you see this beautiful horse museum, and they show when the horse came to North America, when the humans started to sit on horses, and they sit on the horses here on that spot first. Why? Because back then the human legs were longer than the horse's body was tall. And then they migrate themselves forward to this spot. First, they were sitting in the center. You see the old racing pictures where the jockeys has long stirrup leathers and they sit in the middle of the horse's back. And then, of course, more and more they figured out, hey, when I sit at the base of the withers, Caprilli came up with a 2-point seat. You see the racing industry, the old racing picture changed to how the jockeys ride today, with the bullfighters and the rodeo rider sits, and most hunter jumpers, dressage, and pleasure rider sits. So without further ado, let's focus on this point back here, why it's so important that your equipment don't hit there and that you as a rider don't make your equipment there. All right, like since 7,000 years, man, saddle, and horse always work to optimizing the fit. In the army time, soldiers were taught by their officers how to map the horse to identify the ring of light, because here in this ring of light is where the bucking reflex point lives. We don't want to hit anything there. So when they mapped the horse, they looked at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, and especially between line 4 and line 5, in this area right here where the lumbar area starts, that's so critical when it comes to saddle fitting. Most point where the red arrow is, most contact where the saddle sits is where the red arrow sits on the longest, thickest muscle right there in the center, the belly of the muscle of the horse's longissimus. So from the top, we always try to stay away from the spine, always try to stay away from the cartilage, from the shoulder. And for sure, this is here where the lumbar area is. Can't press on that whatsoever. Yes, there's army saddles and Western saddles, and saddles who sit longer there, but they've never been designed, same with the packing saddle, to put pressure on the lumbar. So now comes the responsibility as a rider to sit light. I weigh now, I couldn't believe it, I weigh now 210, and that's a lot of weight, and that's without clothes. Now I'm very tall, very fit, I work out a lot, and if I want to ride a horse, I have to have the right size horse for me.
Yes.
I can choose to sit light or sit heavy. Every time I sit on the toilet or I sit on the chair, I sit heavy, because all my weight is boom on my butt. And if my chair or my toilet disappears, I will fall to the back side of my butt and fall in the back of the saddle. So we see a lot of riders who either get hurt in the crotch because they don't sit in the sex appropriate saddle, or they sit with their legs way far forward. You see here the bareback rider. And of course, certain styles, sports makes us sit there. So if I'm so excited to have you here today because you can show and help what you do. Your website, I checked it out the other day. I don't know why I haven't done it before. It's fantastic.
Yes.
All the exercises you offer. So we need to be soft. We need to be super flexible with our four curves and our joints and ankles, but not always possible if the saddle doesn't fit me or the horse. So between the two human beings, between the horse and the human, we need to have an interface we call the saddle. That's my topic. I'm very well aware that many of us ride horses when they're still in their growth stage, especially when we get Western horses who have been ridden way too early, started at 2 years, or racing horses at 1.5, 2 years already racing. And then the hunter jumper eventer buys the race horses, which have quite a bit of deformity. Okay, never mind about the training we do to the saddle. And if you don't fit it, the shoulder gets wider, the saddle sits too far back, shoulder gets damaged, and then the saddle gets pushed to the back, shoulder can't move. All these signs and all these pictures we have shown in the past is what we always concern. So if all this happens and all the force goes to the back, and I'm going to talk quick from a saddle point of view, and then Aoife will talk about what you can do as a rider to support the horse in the lumbar area. We have shin pads. Okay, always think about when we pad, we focus in the green zone. And in the green zone, you see 30, 40, 30. The reason why all saddles in the world have a slight curve to the bottom is because look at the spine on the bottom. Okay, this is the 30 zone. The 30 zone is where the spinal processes are back. The 40 zone is where you sit as a human these days. That's where the spinal processes are straight. And then the next 30 zone is where the spinal processes are forward. So in the back, there's a lot of movement. In the front, there's the shoulder movement. And here in the center is where you want to sit. That big red stinking X here, that's what I want to focus now on. And this is today's session. That's the bucking reflex point. Look from the back. You're looking here at the two horses' pelvis. Right? You can feel them. And then you look forward. You see the spinal processes, spinal transfer, and then here's a very important muscle, the multifidus. But right there where the rib comes out, that's where a lot of spinal nerves are. In one of my books, what you see in the background there, you see how narrow the channel is. Many saddles still have a lot of problem. We talked about before, spinal nerve damage. Today, check this out. Look how far these lumbars come. And look how high that is compared to where the rib is down there. The rib is down here. That's where the rib goes. So if I look at this distance, which is covered with back muscle, right, different back muscle types, from a side, look at this is the ring of muscles. Or sorry, ring of lights. The reason why we have the ring is because the hair comes up, goes this way, and here the hair comes this way. So when the light, the sun, fluorescent, hits the flank, it shows a different pattern. Now, the soldiers, I showed you in the earlier pictures, use this ring of light to identify, is this saddle the right length? Obviously, this one will hit 110% the ring of lights, because below these lumbars versus transverse, those are attached by muscles, the kidneys. Now, I can actually adjust the saddle purposely to hit it, so your horse goes 4-beat, so your horse will buck. Your horse will not do flying changes correctly, cross the rail in the back, or pees while he rides. Never mind when the horse is in heat, the mare, right? So when the ovaries are going. So just, again, one more time, I cannot stress that enough, how important it is. In the Western world or army saddles, you know, when we look at the shoulder blade, you can see how this whole body is atrophied. Often when you see this line here, okay, starts at the stifle, goes all the way up, you either have spinal problems or you put too much pressure in the lumbar area, because there's many horses who take a lot of abuse. You know, very few horses give you clear signs. Some horses will just walk all of a sudden like a camel, laterally. Some horses will just buckle when you ride. All of a sudden, what happened? My hind leg disappears. So what can we do? What can we do is really focus and identify where is the ring of lights. I, as a rider, need to know where's the ring of lights. So when I see that and I make a chalk line there and I put my saddle on and it's there, perfect. But that's not enough. Just so it's not enough. As I said, I weigh so much. My job is to sit soft. But sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes I carry so much stress with me and I'm so seized up because I'm all day behind my computer or in the office or driving in my car. And now I go to the horse and I want to be supple and ride. That's where you come in. And I hope that you maybe can tell us a little bit about how, I know the rider doesn't have a bucking reflex points, but we all had lumbar issue. Maybe you can elaborate on this a little bit, if I take it away.
You took the words right out of my mouth with that part about the lumbar issues that can take place. And I want to start by going back a little bit to a few more slides that you went over and how the improper position, if I can say it that way, of the saddle and our pressure, as we talked about in previous episodes of this series, is when we understand and know where we are sitting and how we are sitting, we have a better chance of understanding our influence on the horse. So going back to what you said about the male and female pelvic anatomy and the differences between those and the importance of having a saddle that works for you based on how you're built, I think the most important part is understanding those things, because I truly believe that most people aren't aware of some of those differences. And so in some of those differences, we have the male pelvic anatomy, which at the bottom, the ischiotuberosity, which is typically the thing that is most in contact with the saddle, that is more narrow on a male than it is on a woman or a female. So the important aspect is that position is going to change how we sit, because there's a level of comfort. And as you've mentioned before, how a saddle is made and who it's made for is important. So if we're riding saddles that are not made for our physical body, then it's going to have an effect on how we communicate. And so when we go into that position, what I have seen, and I think we've both seen before, is an anterior pelvic tilt, which is pretty much like what do they call that? The duck butt position, where the hips are pulled in a forward manner, causing excessive lower back tension, which, as you were showing, if you could go back to one of the photos with the horse's transverse processes, because I know we talked about it in a previous one with the horse kissing spine, but when those transverse processes of our own, which we have, are too close together, it can cause pinching for nerves. It can cause issues in low back issues because of the muscular structure being too shortened and not having the suppleness or the stability through that low back to mid back area in order for us to, let's say, in this case, the canter, where your hips have to swing. Thank you very much for that photo, this diagram here. But if we think about that arch coming closer together, or a horse hollowing its back, it's not going to be comfortable. That same exact thing can and does happen more often than we think when it comes to our riders in the saddle. So how can we fix some of that? Or how can we think more about what we can and or should do? Number one would be to start with core engagement and stabilizing. In my program with Equestrian Fitness Academy, I'm always talking about my 4 pillars, which are stability, suppleness, strength, and stamina. And these things matter when it comes to the horses training program, as well as the riders training program, which is where my focus is. So in order for us to engage, we can then stabilize properly. If we don't know where our hips are in space and certain movements are challenging for us, it will then translate, or definitely translate, over to the horse, especially over time when we are in discomfort and or pain and more things that are just not comfortable. So
is this what you were talking about, the Equestrian Fitness Academy?
That is my website. If you go to the I believe it's the About page, you'll see the 4 pillars on there. So the stability, there you go. The stability component of this must come first. And in order for you to stabilize a joint area, we must have the proper engagement of the musculature. And so with those two things, we go back to how do we do that? I would say a great exercise to start or a movement to learn or master is the bridge. And most people think of the bridge, we just hike the hips up, laying on your back. But I really want people to think, and I've learned this through my Pilates practice over the years, which is articulating the spine, which is using control from the lower hips or the hips, pelvis, all the way up through the upper back as we're peeling our back off the floor, lifting the hips up higher, and then lowering back down. The control of that is going to then not only stabilize, but engage the muscles, then strengthen the muscles. And then the more repetitions that we do it, it then becomes a muscular endurance with stamina. So that's just one exercise that you can do to really get a hold of what you're doing. In any assessment that I do with riders, I've noticed that when it comes to, we typically do a standing pelvic tilt position from the 2-point, which is functional for what we do in the saddle, right? English or Western. But in this case, I see that there's a challenge between certain angles, and it's typically that anterior pelvic tilt, not necessarily the posterior, which is really arching the lower back and having that control within that motion. How does this affect what we do with our horse? Getting back to the human and how we can be our best selves so that we can cause the less pain to our horse. It starts at us. And as we talked about in many other series before, I don't know, it's 3 or 4 or what number we're on either, we've talked about the consistency in these two things converging. And that's why you and I are having this conversation, because what you've seen over the many years of doing this, whether it's building, making, fitting, all of those things, is there's a consistency within what you see. And that is the rider who is or has not been aware of what to do and how to do it so that they can be even better for their partner or partners that they may have, because not everyone has a horse and not everyone has multiple. So those two things are what I would say I would start with.
Yeah. So I want to go back to a school what is over 400 years in business. You know, that school is the Vienna Riding School. And, you know, you were there for a year on the lunge line to develop a pliable seat. And a pliable seat is nothing else. I love that exercise. You're probably doing it too, where you stand in that Tai Chi position, and then you put your lower arm on your belly button and the other lower arm on your back. And then you have to pretend you do number 2, and you can feel how you make your pelvis rigid. And then you have to suck in your belly button to the spine and stick the belly button out. So where you keep your alignment, you just push your belly button in and out, and you can do the pelvis tilt. Now, when we sit on the horse, the number 1 rule is without any muscle contraction, your leg should fall underneath you. That's where I come in again. You know, when like you said, Eva, when the equipment hits you in the crotch, turns your toes out, or is too much between your upper and the thigh, you're not riding the horse. You're deforming yourself over an equipment before you even get to the horse. And never mind this difficulties of today's society. And I'm going back to this old saying we had in Europe. So I don't know how to say it in English, so I have to say it always in German first. Reiter, merkt euch auf allen Wegen, reiten lernst du nur durch Fegen, which means rider, remember all your life, riding you only learn if you sweep the barn aisle. So we had this heavy broom with these, it looks like from the 1600s where witches were riding through the sky with. So we had to broom out, but all these kids, you wouldn't believe the core.
Yes.
You know, the exercise from all the mucking out the barns, you know, how much stuff, how fit we were. And today we have leaf blowers going through the aisle and clean the aisle, right? We move less. And what we also have less is that the saddle industry caters to this. And what have changed is not the school here, but what have changed is the evolution of the seat. You know, from fork seat to upright seat, how do we should sit? It all boils down to the same. You know, you want to sit natural in the saddle, where you're not pushed forward or back, because if you sit like the middle rider there, you think your saddle fits, you're going to put all the pressure on T17, T18, the last ribs, and then closest to the bucking reflex points. So if you lack of core muscle or you're sitting in the wrong sex-appropriate saddle, it will happen. And it doesn't matter if you sit in an English saddle, bareback, or you sit on a Western saddle.
Right.
This is a cool trip. Every riding pants has a seam. That seam cannot be in an angle like this. Your riding pants, when you sit on the horse, bareback, Western or English, that has to be perpendicular. I mean, that has to be falling down straight, because then oh, my pelvis is in the neutral position. Now I can have a pliable seat. If you start off like this, or like this, like you're sitting like a C, okay, you will use your back muscle to protect you. Like you were explaining about the lumbar area, you will create unnecessary pressure to the horse's back, what literally instantly will result to the horse's a pain area. So if besides what you said already, is there anything what relates to clients you've seen in the past would have a lot of lumbar issues?
That's very common. I would say that's the one of the most researched issues that we have in our industry. There was just another one recently, I want to say out of Brazil, that also studied and learned that majority of riders are struggling through back pain. And so one of my goals is to figure out how we can minimize, reduce, or mitigate back issues by strengthening the pelvic floor, strengthening and building more suppleness through that area. As weird as that may sound, exercise can be done for that area, as well as the abdominals, as well as the core. And most people forget that the core extends from the hamstrings all the way up to about your mid-back area, and then obviously around the front side. And so if there is an issue with, as we talked about, the ischial tuberosity, that's the portion that we all sit on directly on the horse. But that last photo you just shared, someone wasn't sitting properly on it. They were sitting more so on their tailbone. That's so right. The interesting aspect of understanding how to get out of back pain is also understanding how that affects your center of mass, center of gravity. If you're tilted in any position, that forked seat, and the other diagram that you had there with the different riding positions, all of those things are affecting the rider and how they're aligned, even at the seated aspect of it, before we get into a 2-point, before we get into any sort of movement. So figuring out how we can go back to this again, engage properly, and then stabilize that area, because we're talking about 20 plus pairs of muscles make up our core. And I'm being very generous with that.
I find a good slide to show again what you were saying earlier.
Thank you.
About the pubic symphysis here. On the lady it's flatter, on the male is steeper, and then you can see the butt cast where we have here. When you come to our room, our butt museum, you don't have to be a medical doctor or know anything about pelvis. You see two shapes. One looks like that, and one looks like that. Okay, and very clear. If I'm looking at a Western saddle or English saddle, doesn't matter. The shape doesn't change.
Right.
And if I know that as a rider, and if I know that as a trainer, and I know there's 9 different seat options in the Western, and 9 different options in the English saddle. We see many jokes on the internet about cowboys having bow legs and seat bones hurting and their tailbone hurts and all that. But many saddles can be adjusted or can be bought right from the get-go, so the rider doesn't have to end up on a horse what gets hidden because of the rider doesn't have this nice aligned seat alignment. The horse will react. The horse will react if you compensate, and the only way they can do it is by flight or fight,
Right.
or give up. I mean, that's of course the most horrible picture here, what you see, but I cannot stress enough to say to everybody who's listening, look at the ring of lights. Nature doesn't lie. Look at that. You can stand back and you see it when the sun hits it. Put your saddle on, put the D-ring behind the end. If the saddle is in that area, the horse is in trouble. If it's in the area, you want to make a nice little exercise, very, very easy. You can have your riding pants on, lean back and forth, and you do not want to hit with your or on your saddle an area, what is a bone structure right here, oops, right here on the front of the picture right there. Okay, that's your pubic symphysis, and that's the area where you're trying to roll away from it unintentionally. Yeah, I think we pretty much beat that topic to death. But for me, as a saddle fitter, I can only do so much. Even if the saddle fits well, look after your body. And I see it too many times, unfortunately, that I see saddles which are not bad saddles, but the rider needs a lot of help. And this is why I encourage everybody to check your website out, www.ifafit.com. And I believe strongly that just like on the wagon wheel, every spoke is important. Every aspect of saddle fitting is important. No shoe, no hoof, no horse, and the saddle will not fit if the rider is not fit. So Aoife, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it, and I look forward to talk to you next time.
Thank you. Looking forward to the next one as well. Bye now.
Take care. Bye, Aoife.